So it's been about a week since Sonic Movie 3 premiered, and people who like my videos want to know what I thought about the movie. This was a movie that had huge anticipation coming in, and even did a loose, and I mean very loose, adaptation of one of my favorite Sonic games of all time, Sonic Adventure 2. It's safe to say that this film did a very good job critically. A lot of people actually enjoyed it, which is pretty surprising for the Sonic movies, because when you take a look at the first movie, the gap between the critics and the fans is pretty large. You know, it's like a 30-point swing almost. Sonic 2 is no different. It's improved from the first film critically, but also there's still a pretty large gap in between the tomato meter and the fan score, if you will. So when you look at the score of Sonic Movie 3 with an 88% certified fresh and the 97% popcorn meter fan rating, it is extremely impressive that they were able to pull this off. I can't express exactly how proud I am in words that the movie franchise from Paramount has went from this to a shot in their movie that actually looks like this. Like, I cannot believe this is real. By the way, this is the best the Sonic and Shadow pose has ever looked in any media ever. Some of the things that they pulled off in this movie is genuinely incredible, and truly a lot of callbacks and love letters to the actual Sonic franchise. If you told me that, you know, some of the stuff we would see in this film were things that we would get after watching the first movie back in 2020, I would have been like, no freaking way. They really went all out with some of the scenes in this movie. With that being said, with all the praise and all the hype, I'm here to tell you guys right now that unfortunately this is not a perfect movie. But then again, you can't really go into something like this expecting a perfect movie. The film certainly has a younger demographic or younger audience in mind, and they never really fail to remind you of this fact in several points throughout the movie, despite maybe adapting one of the more darker stories in the Sonic franchise, which is Sonic Adventure 2. However, I don't think this is something you can necessarily hold the movie accountable for, because that is the intended audience. We're not gonna sit here and subtract points for a movie for reaching their intended audience. Sonic Movie 3 is definitely a good movie, and it's definitely a fun time, something that the entire family will enjoy. There's no doubt about that in my mind after watching it twice. If you're looking for any sound bites, definitely make sure to include that part. This is certainly a lovable film, but also I can't help but feel like I was a little bit frustrated when I came out of the theaters, a little bit. I think a lot of this is partly due to the fact that I was pretty much spoiled for almost everything that was happening in this movie. I knew scene for scene exactly every single thing that was going to happen, whether it's through trailers, TV spots, a leaked storyboard, extremely rude people in the comment section of my videos and streams intentionally spoiling the movie for me, or any social media app you click on. The first thing the algorithm is going to throw into your face is spoilers, or a Sonic 3 premiere that premiered a little bit earlier in certain parts of the world. It's hard to say that pretty much anything in this movie surprised me, and I'm really upset with that. It really bothered me that I knew what was going to happen, which may have subtracted from some of the gravity of the moments. Despite being extremely hyped up for this movie for 2.5 years, a lot of the spoilers did ruin the experience for me. With that being said though, I think there's something that this film did that got in its own way, absent of any spoilers. So let's get into the good, let's get into the bad, let's not even waste any time, let's just get right into it. So, on a positive note, let's start with the good, because there is a lot of good in Sonic 3. To start off, this movie looks absolutely incredible, and we got some of the best action in the entire series. This movie wastes absolutely no time getting into the action. As a matter of fact, I think we start doing some fight scenes literally within the first, minute of the movie. When I said earlier that this was a fun movie, I was not lying. Things are extremely fun. The fight scenes are extremely well choreographed. It just seems like they really upped the ante on the visuals, action, and CGI. And we actually know that's the case, because even the Knuckles TV show on Paramount Plus had 300 more VFX shots than the first Sonic movie. Just based off of that news alone, we knew that we were going to be in for an absolute visual treat with Sonic Movie 3, and they certainly delivered on that aspect. They increased the budget by, I think, around $30 million for this movie, so you can tell pretty much in every shot that that money did not go to waste. When the film directors and writers talked about how they want these movies to be viewed as like Avengers type movies, there's no doubt that they definitely nailed it in that department. And it all definitely culminates with that climax. I mean, that fight between Super Sonic and Super Shadow. I really hate that I knew that this was going to happen based off of all the spoilers that were out there, but my body literally left my soul watching this happen in real life. That fight is the closest thing we'll get to a real life Dragon Ball Z scene, so kudos to the team for actually including that, and really, this is what Sonic is at its core. Also, tell me how cool that scene is when Sonic and Shadow dap up to go super. That was literally the dap heard around the world. It was just so cool, man. And then earlier in that scene, you see the heartfelt moment between Sonic and Shadow, where Shadow kind of realizes what he's been doing this whole time has been wrong, and through Sonic's actions and Gerald's antics, he realized that this wasn't what Maria wanted, and that you can still live with your pain while making making the right choices. And truly, this is the best moment of the film, and I think like the 5 to 6 minute stretch between the Sonic and Shadow fight, them going super, teaming up, this is easily the best stretch of the entire cinematic universe. This right here is exactly what we came to this theater to see. Paramount does a spectacular job of actually humanizing Shadow, which is always something that I love to see. This scene will probably live rent-free in my head for a long time. Everything about Sonic and Shadow being super together is peak cinema, 10 out of 10. There's no doubt that the scenes featuring Super Sonic and Super Shadow is probably the coolest that they've ever looked together. Even cooler than Sonic Adventure 2 if you think about it. I mean, this is a CGI movie compared to a video game from the 2000s. I would say for a hot second in this movie, this is probably the most aura Super Sonic or Super Shadow has ever had in the entire history of the franchise. Seeing the moment of Super Sonic and Super Shadow team up together and actually be friendly with each other is something that I've dreamed about since I was a kid. Like, parts of this movie really took me back to the good old days of life when I played Sonic Adventure 2 on my GameCube. There was not a worry in the world. There were no responsibilities. It was just gaming, having some fun. And in a lot of ways, this movie does help you kind of feel like a kid again, especially if you are a Sonic fan. And back to what I was saying before, seeing Sonic and Shadow team up together was always something that was special to me as a kid, because to me growing up in SA2, when Sonic and Shadow teamed up, it feels like they were always like kind of like gonna be friends after that. And then they give Shadow the amnesia plot line in Sonic Heroes and Shadow 05. So you never really get to see the potential of their team ups as the franchise progresses. Another spectacular thing that Sonic Movie 3 is that Paramount definitely listened to the fans. One of the biggest criticisms of Sonic Movie 2 was that there was too much human subplot. You know, you had the wedding scene, you had the dancing scene, although there's a dancing scene in this movie. A lot of the things that people love about the Sonic movies, I feel like they just kind of took to the next level and 100x'd all of the good things of the franchise. The people asked for Sonic characters and Sonic characters only, and they pretty much got that. I mean, the movie had very little emphasis on any of the original human characters from this film. It cuts out what a lot of people would consider to be fluff from the previous film. However, this can be a little bit at the expense of the film's pacing, but it didn't have to be. Which, speaking of characters, let's talk about the characters in the movie. I think the Sonic characters were definitely at their strongest in this movie. I feel like Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles have a great dynamic. I love seeing the Team Sonic stuff. You know, these three have definitely been through a lot together, so it's really interesting to see their dynamic bounce off of each other. As far as Knuckles and Tails go, I was wondering, you know, what was going to be their role in this movie? Were they going to take a little bit of a step back as the film tries to focus more on Shadow and Gerald Robotnik and, you know, that kind of plot line? And while Knuckles and Tails were definitely supporting roles, I feel like they definitely held their own in this movie and they were integral to the plot, especially at the end. I mean, both of them literally saved Sonic, and that was a pretty heart-wrenching moment. Like, I gotta say, that was definitely awesome to see because they weren't completely sidelined like some people were expecting. I mean, if you consider what they did to Tails in movie 2, he definitely did not get enough time to really flesh out his arc. A lot of ways, with all like the goofy stuff that kind of goes on in this movie with like some of the childish humor, Tails does keep things kind of grounded, as well as Shadow. He definitely does that too. But Tails definitely kind of seems like the voice of reason throughout this movie. Like when Sonic is about to scrap with Knuckles, he's like, hey, like we're a team, like things are gonna be okay. Also, the scene with Agent Stone, Tails is kind of like prying into his life, asking if him and Eggman are best friends, and kind of makes Stone realize some things too. So I'm pleasantly surprised in the screen time that Tails got and how important he was to the movie. Can't forget about Knuckles either. I mean, obviously, like I said before, Tails and Knuckles do kind of take a little bit of a back role, but at the same time, they are given adequate amount of time to shine in this film, and they do end up playing a big role. Knuckles was genuinely hilarious. Like, I'm not gonna lie, like, you could say what you want about the humor in the film, like, a lot of the things that Knuckles say is genuinely funny. So I thought Tails and Knuckles were great, and I'm actually happy with the way that they were portrayed. Also, have to give hats off to Idris Elba and Colleen. They definitely killed it as Tails and Knuckles. Was super impressed with their voice performances. I thought Ben Schwartz also did an amazing job with Sonic as well, and we also can't forget Keanu Reeves. I was super impressed with his job as Shadow. He did a great job voicing him as well. And let's talk about Shadow, because I am so happy and thrilled with what they did with Shadow in Sonic Movie 3, which is part of the reason why it's kind of frustrating, because if I told you that we got the best portrayed Shadow in the history of the entire Sonic the Hedgehog franchise, video games, movies, comics, whatever, this is my favorite Shadow ever. Just about. I mean, 06 and SA2 are great, but like, this is on par with that Shadow. If I told you we got that and there were still a lot of issues with the movie, I would have been like, nah, that's crazy. Like, there's no way. When I say that Shadow was absolutely perfect in this movie, he was absolutely perfect. There's not one single thing I would change about this character. Not his voice actor, not his design, not his story arc in the film, which, by the way, his backstory with Maria was also perfect. It wasn't Sonic Adventure 2. It was something on its own. It was different. They changed his origins a little bit because this isn't Sonic Adventure 2 the movie. They're doing their own thing. But I actually would argue that I think the Maria stuff was really good. It was really heartfelt and touching. Probably better than Maria's backstory in SA2. I mean, considering the fact that she doesn't really have much of a backstory, but they really did a good job of humanizing Shadow and giving him a lot of personality. I feel like personality is something that Shadow is often lacking in a lot of the games for Sonic. I think early on in his history, history as a character. They did a good job with it, but ultimately over the years, it really just boiled down to he's just the edgy hedgehog with nothing else to offer. In Sonic Movie 3, it's the complete opposite. I feel like he has a ton of personality. His motives are crystal clear, and there's true sympathy for him, and you're almost rooting for him in a way. He cracks some jokes and sometimes shows that human side, but also we get to see when he teams up with Sonic, they're bouncing off each other, they're making jokes, but keeping like a friendly rivalry. Shadow really keeps it all together. He keeps this film grounded. When it gets a little goofy, it gets a little crazy, Shadow the Hedgehog is the glue that binds everything in this film together and keeps you focused on the task at hand. He bravely sacrifices himself at the end, and we also just can't forget how badass he is in this movie. I mean, he's literally OP and just destroys everybody, but it's never irrational. We know why he's doing this, and he's probably got a good reason to do so. Plain put, Shadow the Hedgehog is just extremely likable in this film. My fiance, who doesn't really know anything about Sonic, who I took to go see the movie, she said she really loves Shadow. So that's a good sign from the general audience. And also an extremely accurate read on the character, and just kind of shows how good of a job Paramount did with Shadow, surprisingly. Also, like I said before, Keanu Reeves did an amazing job. Going into the film, I was extremely skeptical. I wasn't sure if he was going to make Shadow sound good, but he really did a good job of sounding like the character, but also really selling us on his pain, anger, and emotions. So no complaints with Keanu. Actually a perfect casting in my opinion. So you guys know that I love Shadow in the movie, but we also got to talk about movie Sonic, who in a lot of ways was like this parallel to Shadow. There's a lot of moments in the movie where it's like you see things that Shadow goes through that Sonic also has to go through in the movie as well, and kind of like they had this similar upbringing, so there's a lot of contrast to them. But as far as movie Sonic goes, they'll never make me hate movie Sonic. I don't care. I know Twitter likes to have a field day with their movie Sonic hatred, but this character is super fun, super energetic, super charming, and when he locks in, movie Sonic absolutely locks in. It happens in every movie, despite all of like the little jokes and stuff that he likes to crack, the little quips, which I don't even mind. I don't even have a problem with them. I don't think they're that bad, especially in movie 3. Like, I just recently watched movie 2, and maybe you can make a case for some of his dialogue kind of getting in the way, movie Sonic, but when you watch movie 3, I feel like he's at its best. Any of the quips and dialogue that people didn't like about Sonic in Sonic movie 3, I feel like none of it actually gets in the way of the plot, and if there's anything that you found like you didn't like about him in this movie, it was pretty throwaway. Never really like took away from the gravity of any scenes, at least in my opinion. Like, if you think of the top 10 cringiest things that happened in this movie, I would say pretty much all 10 of those moments. Like, if I made a tier list, top 10 cringiest moments in Sonic movie 3, every single one would be something said or done by Jim Carrey, unfortunately. So when it's time to turn up, this guy really turns up, especially after Tom was injured in the movie. He almost fights Knuckles. He goes super and tries to take out Shadow. Like, he really knows when to take things seriously, and I think that's when he's at his best. Obviously, that's when he mirrors Game Sonic the most, and he has really solid moments where he turns up and takes things seriously in every single movie. He can be a little bit childish at times, but this is a different interpretation of Sonic. But like I said, when he gets serious, I mean, he even tried to kill Dr. Eggman. Like, this guy does not care. When movie Sonic is at his absolute best, he is extremely strong, just as good as any Sonic. I was really nervous going into this movie because in every single trailer, they just made Shadow seem like he was impossible to beat, and I feel like after watching the film, especially from start to finish, I feel like Sonic, at least by the end of the movie, I think he was just about an even match for Shadow. Like, he definitely can hold his own against him, and he even gets the victory at the end against Super Shadow. So I'm actually really impressed with what they were able to pull off with Sonic, and like I said, by the end of the film, I feel like even a lot of movie Sonic haters were apologizing to him. Another thing I'd like to point out that was a positive, how about that post-credit scene? So, you know, people once again were spamming my stream chat with spoilers. I knew Amy and Metal Sonic would be the character, but the way they went about it still left up a lot of surprises for me. There's multiple Metal Sonics. Amy Rose is in the film. You'll also notice in the background of the post-credit scene that the moon is still destroyed, so I feel like that's going to have an impact as to why Amy's on Earth, but it's like a lot of things are still up in the air. What's extremely exciting about the next Sonic film is that there's so many different possibilities as to what they could do. Potentially, we could be springboarding into a new trilogy for the Sonic movies. Obviously, the first movie starts it slow, second one picks it up, the third one takes it all the way to space with Super Sonic and Super Shadow with an SA2 adaptation. Now we're going to be introducing even more Sonic characters, and I like that Metal Sonic could potentially be a villain, and maybe there's something greater at play here because, you know, I think he fits within the movie universe. He'll still keep things a little bit grounded. We're not going to go too crazy. The scene in of itself still has a lot of surprises, and I also like the way Sonic was characterized in that scene. I feel like he kind of had some of that signature game cockiness and swag. So as far as the Sonic movie goes, it seems like they're not going anywhere, so bring it on. I'm ready. And I guess it's important to point out another thing I love about this film is an absolute love letter to Sonic Adventure 2, and not only Sonic Adventure 2, which is one of my favorite games, but just the Sonic franchise in general. Everything that people love about these movies, like I said earlier in the review, they 100x all of the good of the films. So to end things off on a positive note, the last thing I'll say is I like that they increased the amount of game references that they had in the movie. I know some of them felt a little out of place, but honestly, I don't care. I'm a sucker for that stuff. When they throw in random references and Easter eggs, like, I'm the target audience for that stuff. I don't care. So I like that they paid a lot more respect to the source material of Sonic. With each successive movie, they got more and more into, you know, the actual game lore type stuff, if you will. Isn't it crazy how with each successive Sonic movie, they actually started throwing in more Sonic elements to the movie, and the review scores from the critics got even better? This should be a lesson to all these Hollywood studios. You don't necessarily have to play it safe. You might as well pay some respect to the source material and what got it to that place to begin with. These Sonic films have a lot of heart, and there's no denying that. I appreciate that the heartfelt moments that were signature to the movies, even in movie 1, even in movie 2, even in the Knuckles series, like, they were still able to touch on some of those good moments that tie things together, and for some can even invoke some tears. Jim Carrey was also a good actor. We can't, you know, leave that out. He had a good performance as Eggman and Gerald. He really gets into these roles, but there is more to say about him. And now let's move on to the bad parts, the things that I didn't like as much. So, like I said in the beginning of the review, Sonic Movie 3 is a good movie, but it's not a perfect movie. So for all of the good that the movie does, I can't help but feel like when I walked out of the theater, I felt like something was a little bit incomplete. I feel like I was a little bit frustrated with some of the way certain things went in this movie. It's weird. I hate to say this, but like when I walked out of the theaters for Movie 3, I wasn't sure. I was like, is this better than Movie 2? Like, I'm not 100% sure. I literally just rewatched Movie 3, and then I just rewatched Movie 2, and, you know, I'm thinking about it. It's like, it's, you know, Movie 3 is better than Movie 2, but, you know, when I walked out of the theater of Movie 2, I was like, yo, that was definitely better than Movie 1. The fact that I wasn't like 100% sure was like a little concerning, considering the fact that like I was so hyped for the movie. But again, maybe knowing every single thing that was going to happen and the very rude spoilers can contribute to this. But I want to ramble on and on about it, so I'll try to keep it as quick and concise as possible. The first major issue I had with the movie was probably the pacing. I feel like it was kind of all over the place, especially when you consider how quickly each scene progresses, really without any chance to stop and like kind of take in the moment of really any moment that the film tries to offer up to us. Within the first 10 minutes of the movie, we're introduced to Shadow. He escapes. Sonic and Tails and Knuckles do the racing scene. Shadow goes to Tokyo, destroys everything. Sonic team meets up with Gun, gets briefed on the mission, goes to Tokyo, fights Shadow, Commander Walters dies, and they end up teaming up with Eggman literally within the first like 10 minutes of the movie. I would say this movie could have definitely benefited for probably like an extra 20 minutes of runtime. The runtime for this movie is about 15 minutes shorter than the second one, which I feel like the second one, if there's one thing you can say it does better than the third movie, I feel like it kind of paces things a little bit better. It builds up everything with proper context to pretty much all the situations that happens. The intro to Sonic Movie 2 like shows Robotnik on the Mushroom Planet. It's like slow. It introduces Knuckles, kind of shows what's been going on since after movie 1. The second movie, whether you like it more than the third movie or hate it, whatever the case may be, I feel like it's kind of just structured a little bit better in terms of like the plot and the progression. It kind of sells you on the adventure a little bit more. It feels like more of an adventure. In addition to that, movie 2 also expands the world building of the Sonic universe, whereas movie 3, you know, it was surprisingly light on the plot. You know, I figured since they were going to do like the Project Shadow stuff, the story and the plot would be a little bit deeper, but I was surprised that, you know, the plot was almost an afterthought. It was more about the action in this movie. There's almost a little bit less world building and lore in Sonic Movie 3, but I would say, you know, based off the action, maybe it is the more fun experience in theaters. So you also probably shouldn't be going into a Sonic the Hedgehog movie expecting crazy world building and lore. Like, the movie's clearly made as like a family movie, so why would I dock points for that, right? It's just something to think about and something that I was kind of wondering about when I was doing this review. But back to the pacing, this one just gets right into it. It goes quick, and it's like, all right, here we go. All right, this movie's about to be crazy. Action's good, like it's popping off. But at the same time, the quick pacing can feel like it's at the expense of the movie because it feels like it's kind of over in a flash. Maybe I'm selfish as a Sonic fan. I want more of the Sonic movie. By the time we progress to Act 2 and get the full Act 2, which is the London scene, that's kind of where the movie, you know, took a little bit of a dive for me. We talk a lot about the pacing, but I do think London was kind of boring and like dragged on a little bit. And then, you know, just, you know, if that was basically all of Act 2, it felt like Act 2 was definitely missing something. So, you know, they introduce Kristen Ritter's character, Commander Rockwell. She comes in and almost feels like it's about to be like, oh, she's the villain. Oh, Gun, you know, they've kind of turned on Sonic, and which they did in the beginning of the movie. It's like, are we going to potentially get some City Escape stuff? Are we going to get some Gun versus Sonic gun truck action? And then, you know, they just wrap up that plot pretty quickly. The buildup and potential of Gun in this film, they made it like pretty interesting, and then you just never hear about them again, and they just shove it aside. Potentially can be explored in a new movie or a spinoff, so still excited for that. Shadow punches Tom in then it just goes straight to the climax. I wasn't expecting the climax to just start right then and there. It felt like between like the end of Act 2 and the beginning of Act 3, something was missing there. There was something that needed to be there to truly tie all the ends together in the film. I was shocked that like Act 3 was starting just like that, because if they just like maybe bridged that together and truly like made it flow a little bit better, it probably would have perfected the movie for me. If there's one thing movie 2 definitely has over movie 3 is, ironically, it bridges Act 2 to Act 3 much better. You had the wedding scene that no one liked, but you also have like the actual culmination of the journey. You have Sonic running across the ocean. The stakes have risen because the Emerald has kind of revealed itself. Knuckles and Robotnik are on their way to the Emerald, culminating with the Sonic vs. Knuckles fight scene, which was absolutely peak, and then Eggman gets the Emerald, and then boom, we're on to the final act. Movie 2 is Act 2, and then abruptly just goes to Act 3. For example, you have the scene where Tom gets injured by Shadow. He gets whisked away in the ambulance, and you literally never see him again for the rest of the movie. They don't emphasize his struggle or anything like that. It's just like you see him in one shot, like for like a split second during Super Sonic, but almost just to remind you that he's even there. But that's kind of Sonic's main motivation for his anger. So I feel like maybe more of a struggle with Tom would have been cool. And then also, I guess another example of the plot and the, you know, some of the conflicts arising and being solved in 2 seconds is the scene where Knuckles and Sonic are about to fight. I'm like, yo, this is about to be crazy. I'm like, this is what they meant when Act 3 is insane. And then Knuckles is just like, oh yeah, Sonic, just take the Emerald. But then it's being guarded by Wade Whipple. And then it's like, it just deflated the entire moment. I thought things were about to pop off and we were about to get something crazy, but I think we needed like maybe one extra scene there. And then one final issue I have with the pacing of the movie is probably, I guess, the climax. As cool as it was, as awesome and amazing, like I rewatched it and I'm like, I had the chills when I saw that scene of Super Sonic fighting Super Shadow. Live and learn. Like, bro, that is the craziest thing as a Sonic fan to see on the big screen. But at the same time, my problem with the climax is this. I really did not like how Super Sonic first enters the movie. So in most Sonic games, it feels like Super Sonic should always be introduced like this. It's the fourth quarter of a basketball game. Your team is down 2 points. You have no timeouts. There's 1 second left on the clock. You literally need to have a full court shot in order to win the game, or you lose and get eliminated from the playoffs. You got one shot. The stakes have never been higher. Everybody knows that you're probably not going to hit this shot. You shoot it from full court and you somehow go in and you make the shot. You win the game. And then the crowd goes absolutely wild. I feel like that's the way Super Sonic should always be used. Like, it's literally this last resort, last second shot that's extremely unlikely. They kind of removed the unlikely factor from it, and this is what I mean. In movie 2, Sonic is certainly going to die. He gets crushed. At this point, you're crying because like you know what's about to happen, but it's like the moment they really build it up and there's this giant struggle for the emeralds. In Sonic movie 3, it feels like there's about to be this big struggle for the emeralds, maybe potentially a battle with Knuckles. And you know, honestly, I was anticipating a battle with Shadow. Sonic just walks up to Wade Whipple, hey loser, give me the emerald, go Super, and that's it. So that part felt a little bit anticlimactic. Usually the Super Sonic buildup has to be a lot greater than, you know, the way he went Super in this movie. They skipped the bridge from Act 2 to Act 3 and basically removed our Hail Mary moment that we're usually accustomed to with Super Sonic that really sells the stakes of what's about to happen. Granted, it's still awesome. Like, I'm a little bit conflicted because while we didn't get the Hail Mary moment, seeing Super Sonic literally go like feral and just like blast through the arc and just take Shadow out, and they just have this one-on-one battle. And there still is kind of the Hail Mary moment because Super Sonic does get the emeralds knocked out of him. So it's like you still have it, but unfortunately he was already Super before that. So it just reduces the gravity a little bit, but the scene was also really cool. So it's like, I'm a little bit conflicted. Like, I wouldn't change necessarily anything about that scene. I would probably just change or add a little bit to what happens prior. Like maybe Sonic and Shadow base form, run to that lava area, meet up, they fight. Sonic maybe is the one that actually goes Super instead of Shadow in the beginning. Like, he still slams them up into space, goes through the arc. They land at a different part, and then you just play everything that happened after. I think that maybe would have sold it a little bit more. I just wish the first Super Sonic scene wasn't Wade just handing him the emerald as opposed to more of like this type of struggle. I wouldn't subtract anything from that moment. I would just add something a little bit extra between that moment and Act 2. However, I will say that the climax of this movie actually addresses my biggest issue with the climax of Sonic 2. And the biggest issue I had with Sonic 2 is after he goes Super, he's literally Super for like 30 seconds. There's not really much of a struggle. I love the fact that movie 3 gave Super Sonic way more screen time, and pretty much everything about Super Sonic hit way harder. It was just really everything leading up to Supersonic's build-up in Sonic 2 that I think they did a little bit better, like that bridge. But movie 3 obviously does everything after he goes super better. So if you take the best of 2 and you take the best of 3 as far as Supersonic goes, you give the build-up of 2 with the climax and action of movie 3, boom, you got the perfect scene. So I kind of wish they leaned into that a little bit more. Another thing I disliked about the movie is that some of the moments that they adapted from Sonic Adventure 2 were not done as good as Sonic Adventure 2. I'd like to preface this by saying Sonic Movie 3 is not Sonic Adventure 2, and that is okay. Paramount can do their own thing, and they're allowed to do that. And there's actually a couple of things that they did better than Sonic Adventure 2, such as Maria's backstory. I'm cool with them adapting whatever they want to do. The only problem is if they're going to try to mirror any elements from Sonic Adventure 2, you would have liked them to have done it better. Let me explain. I think the biggest example of them not really showing what the true stakes are or playing up these stakes is at the end of movie 3 when the Eclipse Cannon is revealed. If you compared that scene to Sonic Adventure 2, it's done and executed a lot better in SA2 because they actually show the gravity of what's about to happen. On Sonic Adventure 2, when the Eclipse Cannon is revealed, the entire world is put on notice. What's really powerful and impactful about these scenes is that you see the reaction of the normal everyday citizens, which they kind of try to do this in movie 3, but it's really, they barely do it. Like, they show it on the screen, but I almost forgot that they did that because they didn't really play up the stakes at all. They just rushed through this scene. And it also ends off with them flexing the power of the Eclipse Cannon by shooting the moon. With all the people onlooking, everybody's scared. After the moon is destroyed in front of the entire population of the world, there's a giant timer thrown on the screen with ominous music that puts everyone on notice. The second trailer of Sonic Movie 2 actually really captures what I thought the climax was going to be. They show the Eclipse Cannon. They most importantly show the reaction of scared onlooking citizens, but this really isn't emphasized or felt at all in Sonic Movie 3. Also in the Movie 3 trailer, they showed the moon being exploded, and unfortunately, this is not shown to flex power or scare the citizens or create tension or create hype. This was done at the very end of the movie when pretty much we've already solved the final battle for the most part. I didn't want them to destroy the moon and kind of mimic this scene because, oh, it's this thing from Sonic Adventure 2. I wanted them to do it because it actually builds tension and hype and really like sets the tone for what the villain's true ambitions are. This is never actually felt. I would have loved to have seen the reaction of every citizen on Earth with a true notice like, yo, the world's about to end. You don't really see any reaction from the citizens for the most part, or like really any impact from what's about to go down. It would have been cool to have seen Tom and Maddie's reaction to the world about to end and like, you know, a big timer going up and like on the news they're saying, hey, the world's about to end. Would have loved to have heard what their thoughts maybe are, what Stone's thoughts are, what Wade Whipple's thoughts are, what random people on the streets thoughts were. We don't really get that, and that kind of diminishes the moment. The world's about to end, and you honestly could have fooled me that that was even the case. I mean, Gerald locks in for like a hot second, for like a little bit, kind of tries to elevate the stakes, and then he just starts wrestling around with Eggman. In the middle of Live and Learn, it cuts to him spanking Eggman. I'm like, dude, why are you doing this? And we just maintain the hype and tension that the movie brilliantly creates for just 1 second without cutting away or undercutting the moment. Cutting away from Live and Learn to the spanking scene is like borderline criminal. I'm sorry. I guess another thing that was adapted from Sonic Adventure 2 that I was really hoping would make into the movie is Shadow's sacrifice, because I feel like it's integral to the plot, 1, and 2, it's going to be heart-wrenching and emotional and really like ground the film. And they put it in, and I'm happy that they did. The only problem I have with Shadow's sacrifice in movie 3 is that you don't really feel the impact of his sacrifice, because obviously, you know, I'm a Sonic fan, and maybe I'm biased about this because I know exactly how this was going to end. You know, in Sonic Adventure 2, I know that Shadow's not actually dead. So in order for the moment to hit as hard as it could have, you really got to sell this sacrifice to me. I mean, they kind of did it with Eggman. They really sold his sacrifice. You know, it's kind of ambiguous as to whether or not he could come back. But in SA2, I think Shadow's sacrifice is executed better, in part because, 1, they showed the reaction of all the citizens after Sonic and Shadow save the world, which I feel like is important. I feel like that adds to the gravity of the situation. In addition to that, in SA2, there's an actual like true epilogue for Shadow. Watching the cutscene of Sonic returning to the Ark with the super sad music playing, to this day still gives me chills. And maybe it's not a case of spoilers or anything like that that ruined the moment for me, because I know exactly what's going to happen in SA2, and this cutscene still gives me the chills to this day. So I feel like with Shadow's sacrifice, while it was awesome, I don't like that the hero characters did not reflect on Shadow. Like, he dies and sacrifices himself, and then the movie just basically ends. It's kind of a microcosm of the issues I had with the pacing, because there really isn't a true epilogue to this movie. It's like Shadow and Robotnik sacrifice themselves, the Sonic characters like, yeah, we did it, and then literally ends. Like, there's no true epilogue. There's no sayonara Shadow the Hedgehog. There's no reflection. There's no like, no, let the moment sink in a a little bit, especially for fans like myself that knew exactly what was going to happen. I wish they would have sold the sacrifice just a little bit more and kind of, you know, had that moment have its impact. It was still great. Like, I know for the average person that doesn't know the story of SA2, it's probably going to hit just as hard for them, but still, I think a true proper epilogue, just give us like maybe an extra 5 minutes at the end instead of just like going straight to the credits would have been better. There was about 20 minutes of this movie that was missing to truly make it like an actual perfect movie. The last thing, unfortunately, I think was subtracting a little bit from my enjoyment of the film, I think was a little bit of Jim Carrey, which is pretty crazy to say because the average movie critic, reviewer, or whatever is gonna say, you know, the only reason why I watch this film is Jim Carrey. Unfortunately, it felt like he was trying just like a little too hard in this movie to like steal the spotlight. He's a good actor. He's really good in the roles. He gets into the roles. Unfortunately, I feel like Eggman's character was definitely a little bit diminished. I don't feel like at any part of the movie he was really evil. Like, I feel like the menacing factor from Eggman and Gerald was definitely not really there. You get it a little bit from Gerald for like literally 30 seconds, and then again it just cuts into like the wrestling around, spanking each other and whatever. I know a lot of people find that to be really funny, but I don't know, it wasn't really hitting that hard for me. A lot of the stuff Eggman was doing in the movie was like, it was a little over the top for me. But Jim Carrey's performance, while it was good, like it was a good acting job, I think the problem is they never truly build up an actual villain. Like, it feels like this is a movie without any villains. So that's what I kind of wanted the destroying the moon thing to be. It's like, okay, the villains have arrived. It's like the villains never really arrive, at least in Sonic movie 2, for all like, you know, the things that people don't like about it. The villain does arrive in that movie. Giant death egg robot that terrorizes the town for like 10 minutes, and it's like this really big struggle that was pretty much absent from Sonic movie 3. And then all my frustrations with the Eggman, especially like when Gerald's finally starting to build up, they do all the goofy stuff, cutting back and forth from Live and Learn to that, and then they just kill him unceremoniously, and it's like, where's the build up for the villains? That was something that was genuinely absent from the film. As a film in of itself, I think that is a problem. I understand the audience is trying to reach, there's no problem with that. Obviously this is a family movie, but you still should build up a villain, no matter what the age demographic that they're trying to reach is, you know what I mean? I would have liked to have seen a little bit more menacingness from these two characters. For example, look at this moment right here of the concept art that was recently just shared. You got Eggman and Gerald holding some type of ray gun. The gun facility's on fire. They're getting shot at. They look really cool. Gerald has a briefcase right here, so they presumably were maybe going to steal the Ark stuff themselves. Then you compare it to the scene that we got where it's Eggman and Gerald Robotnik, Jim Carrey and Jim Carrey just hitting Fortnite dances and the lasers for like 5 minutes. I'm like, bro, this is not hitting for me. I don't know. It was really pulling my immersion away from the movie. And I know some people, the only reason, especially like reviewers, the only reason why they watch these movies is to see Jim Carrey do crazy stuff like this. To me, in a lot of ways, it didn't feel like we were watching Dr. Eggman. It was Jim Carrey wearing a Dr. Eggman suit. And the same goes for Gerald. Mentioned earlier in the review that it's good that Paramount took our feedback and really drastically reduced a lot of the human subplots in the movie. But at the same time, with Jim Carrey's performance, while he, you know, it was good as an acting performance, it's cool that like this guy really gets into these roles. At the same time, Eggman was really starting to feel like one of those random human characters that we don't necessarily care about as much. If there's anything to criticize about the humor of the film, a lot of the times it did come from his end. Of course, he did get a pretty satisfying arc. Like, it was definitely cool to see the transformation from movie 1 to movie 2 to movie 3 and being rejected by his grandfather and then eventually sacrificing himself to save the world. Like, that was definitely cool. Like, I saw this tweet where it says really cool, interesting scene that I'm having fun with Sonic and Shadow in the movie, and then this other part of it where it says cuts to Jim Carrey hijinks for 6 minutes. And I was like, yeah, it's kind of accurate to how I was feeling a little bit during the movie. Instead of just trying to make us laugh with the most crazy and outrageous things that you would ever imagine in this movie, I kind of wish that they remembered that they were like the main villains and antagonists of the film just a little more. I don't want to sound like an ungrateful Sonic fan. I'm obviously very happy that Jim Carrey has been in 3 of the Sonic movies, and we really owe a lot of the franchise's success to him. That's just kind of my criticism. I think the biggest thing is like they just shot themselves in the foot by not truly building up a proper villain, and that's something that could have totally been avoided, and it would have took the movie to the next level for me if they just had the I'm here, I'm villain moment. But that's just my 2 cents. Of course, I'd like to see him come back for movie 4, and I hope he does, because we need Eggman in these movies. So Sonic movie 3, it's finally come to an end, and it's been a wild ride covering this film, and it's pretty bittersweet to me because when I first started my YouTube channel a couple years ago, Sonic movie 2 was just coming out. It's been truly surreal to do all this because Sonic 3 was my first full like coverage of a movie from start to finish, even from the very day that they revealed a logo for this movie before the second one even came out. We've been through it all together. We covered every single news drop together. We watched every single trailer. We listened to every single leaker falsely tell us when the trailer was going to come. We begged and we pleaded for the Sonic movie 3 trailer, and it broke the internet when it came out. Once again, I'm so happy with the success that the movie franchise has had. Seeing the amazing critic reviews feels so special as a Sonic fan because because we're not really used to this. This is something that is almost like new territory to us. What better way for a Sonic project to achieve this high of a score than a Sonic project that pays homage to SA2, which is one of my favorite games. They did Shadow Justice, which is incredible. I guess my final write-up is this. Sonic Movie 3 is an absolute blast to watch. It's extremely fun. This is a movie that is perfect for any family to see, and the next generation of Sonic the Hedgehog fans will be introduced to Sonic through this movie, and they will become lifelong fans. And that, above all, is the most important takeaway from this movie. It's not about me. Long after I'm gone and done making YouTube videos, the next generation of kids will grow up feeling a sense of love and nostalgia for this film, as well as the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise in general. Perhaps they'll go on to become the next YouTuber covering Sonic or wherever life takes them, but it feels like life will come full circle. The next generation will grow up exactly as I did with Sonic, seeing Super Sonic and Super Shadow team up to save the world, showing them that anything is possible, and having a franchise that means so much to them impact their lives forever. While Sonic 3 does leave a little bit on the table that could have been avoided, such as a blazing fast pace that makes a 110-minute movie feel like a 60-minute movie, some jokes that definitely do not always land, Sonic 3 is also a film that gives fans of all ages the highest highs that you can experience in the entire cinematic universe, and for that, the lasting impact will always be felt. The film went from ugly Sonic to a redesigned Sonic and Shadow going super while Live and Learn was playing. I think that right there should tell you all that you need to know. These movies have a lot of heart and soul, so I fully endorse and recommend any Sonic fan to go watch this movie to support the franchise and help it achieve the success that it deserves, and they will walk out of that theater having a lot of fun. As a film in of itself, it's probably not life-changing, but as a Sonic fan, it's something that a lot of us could only have dreamed of. They were like this close. It was so close to being the absolute perfect movie, but there's just a couple things, just a couple head-scratching decisions. They had everything there to make it perfect, but at the end of the day, you go to this theater, you'll have a fun time, and that's all that really matters. That's all it really should be. It doesn't have to be any deeper than that. And while it's sad and bittersweet that the journey of Sonic 3 is finally over, and it's really hard to believe that, you know, after all these years, we're done with it, the journey is just getting started, because in 2027, we got another movie coming up, so it seems like the sky's the limit. I hate to give it a number rating out of 10, because those things change over time, but I'm probably at like a 7.5 out of 10. I mean, I only saw the movie twice, and it definitely got better in my second rewatch, so like, these things kind of change over time. But nonetheless, good movie. Please go watch it. It's been an honor to cover this movie. What a wild ride, and I'm sure I'll be seeing all of you very soon. So take care until next time.